Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon. Gracias a todos por unirse. On behalf of Centro de Estudios de Gobernanza Global at the Universidad Austral, I'm delighted to welcome you to this new edition of Diálogos de Gobernanza Global, a series we launched in 2021. And today's session, we are humbled to be organizing it with KU Leuven Global Governance Studies Center. And we think it couldn't be more timely because the United Nations is navigating one of the most consequential leadership transitions in its recent history. Secretary General Antonio Wouters concludes his second and final term this coming December. And the selection process for his successor is now actively underway. A decision is expected by October. So the person who steps into that role will inherit an organization under real structural strain, budget pressures, contested reform proposals, deep geopolitical fragmentation. So the question before us today is not merely who will lead the United Nations, but what kind of leadership the moment demands and what the answer tells us about the future of multilateralism and global governance. So before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge who's in the room. Today, we're joined by participants from more than 30 countries from around the world. There's professionals, academics, civil society leaders, diplomats, and students. So we think global governance is everyone's business, and your perspectives from different regions and tradition will enrich this conversation enormously. So thank you for being here. And a few practical points. The session will be conducted in English. We are taking also questions in other languages in the Q&A through the chat. The session is being recorded and may be shared through other channels afterwards. We ask you all to keep your mics muted. And we have a dedicated 20-minute Q&A block after the speakers have presented. And so we encourage you to use the chat function to submit your questions, comments, and reflections. So I'll go swiftly to introduce our speakers. Ricardo Lagorio served as Argentina's ambassador to Russia and permanent representative to the United Nations. He was posted to the permanent mission of Argentina to the UN and to the Embassy of Argentina in the US. He also served as Chief of Staff at the Ministry of Defense, was Undersecretary of Policy and Strategy at the same ministry, and Foreign Policy Advisor to the Vice President. He holds a bachelor degree in political science and is a PhD candidate in political science at CUNY. And at Austral, he's an adjunct director at our Centro de Estudios de Gobernanza Global. Ricardo brings to this conversation a practitioner's lens. He's someone who has navigated the corridors of multilateral organizations and understands very well the gap between ideal and the possible. And Professor Jan Wouters is a full professor of international law and international organizations, Jean Monnet Chair at Personam, founding director of the Institute for International Law and the Leuven Center for Global Governance Studies. And he's also an administrator of the America-Europe Fund at KU Leuven. He's adjunct professor at Columbia University, visiting professor at the Collège d'Europe and Paris II University in France. A member of the Belgian Royal Academy and of Council at Omega Law, he has published widely on international and EU law, international organizations, global governance, corporate and financial law. He has recently coordinated a large Horizon 2020 project called Reconnect and a large KU Leuven Center of Excellence program, Connectivity. He regularly advises and trains international organizations and governments and often asked to comment on international events in national and international media. Jan brings a distinguished academic and legal perspective with decades of research at the intersection of international law, international design, and global governance. Thank you both for being here today. And without further ado, I want to give Ambassador Ricardo Lagorio the floor.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Sofia. Well, it's really a great pleasure to share the floor with Professor Jan Wouters. So let's start. As in 1648, 1815, 1919, and 1945, we are in a period in which the challenge is to maintain a certain order in a world of sovereign states, which is not tantamount of a world order. It's a concept I am not always very happy with. But there's a big paradox. We are commemorating the 80th anniversary of the creation of the UN, while at the same time going through a time of multilateral low tide, a scenario resulting from an insufficient commitment to cooperation on global issues. While the great challenge and problems of our times are of global nature, I always remind that fantastic definition of former Secretary General Kofi Annan, problems without borders. Yes, climate change, ecological transition, pandemics, human rights, terrorism and generalized violence, forced migration, poverty, inequality, hunger, malnutrition, artificial intelligence, don't need passport. There's no wall that can detain them. We are definitely in a moment of profound interdependency. I used to be a good friend of Joseph Nye, and I always remind his incredible work with Kiren on interdependence. Yes, we still are in a very interdependent world. So in this current scenario of great turbulence, renewed rivalry among major power, it is very necessary and pertinent to ask ourselves, does multilateralism matter in the 21st century? Is it still valid? Is the institutional scaffolding that emerged in San Francisco with the United Nations as its center still relevant? What is the degree of influence on the agendas, public policies, and the conduct and outcome of the interactions of the states? I do believe it is very valid. But multilateralism cannot be defined solely in nominal terms by the number of states or actors involved, and as it is reduced to a mere quantitative formula. Multilateralism, as Robert Keohane defines it very well, is an adjective that modifies the known institution. Multilateralism, therefore, represents one of the generic forms of institutionalization of international relations. The others could be, as John Gerard Ruggie rightly points out, bilateralism and imperialism itself. Imperialism that has come back. Thus, an approach to multilateralism requires both an institutional approach, organizing structures of human interaction, and a normative one, generalized principles of conduct. And I would say that it is also necessary to incorporate into the analysis the invisible institutions of which Pierre Rosanvallon speaks: trust, authority, and legitimacy, as they constitute factors of integration, cooperation, and regulation structuring the social world. But let's start dealing more practically with certain elements for what I think is an effective multilateralism for this 21st century. Definitely, we need multilateralism, but we need to adapt it to this new environment. We don't have any more 51 states. We have 193. First time I was posted at the UN last century from 1982 to 1989, there were 150. When I came back in 2024, there were 193. And that is very important. We speak very much about the 20th century in terms of the two global wars, and we forget that fantastic event which was decolonization. Decolonization. It's a key feature of the 20th century which has still an important impact. And I would like to start with one of the elements that I want to stress. The UN Charter starts with "we the people," not "we the state," not "we the nations." It refers to what Bertrand Badi calls la mystérieuse énergie sociale, the mysterious social energy, because it puts military strength and power into a new perspective, as we are witnessing in every major conflict. Globalization is not only an economic or political phenomenon, but also a new and dense space for intersocialities of all kinds. In this post-Westphalian era, and I do believe that we are moving away from Westphalia, the resilience of we the people is an important factor. So my first point will be, let's encourage more participation of we the people. If you are at the UN, you will see during the General Assembly and all along the year a lot of soft power dimensions in areas such as human rights, gender, development, economics. Let's say in the second or third committee, you see a lot of participation of NGOs, public, individuals. We the people is there. But that is not necessarily the case if you move to other areas. For instance, in the first committee, the disarmament, it's still like a silo for technical expertise. You will not see on the corridors of a meeting of the first committee people going around. It's very much the formal tradition of diplomacy. And I think that as much as the charter starts with "we the people" and not necessarily "we the state" or "we the nations," we should encourage more participation by "we the people" in all the areas of the concrete work space at the UN. Another point I would like to stress for a more effective UN: prevention. The next Secretary General should make much more use of the mechanism of the UN Charter. There's an article that it's not very much used, Article 99, which states that the Secretary General may bring to the attention of the Security Council any matter which, in his opinion, may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security. So the Secretary General should have a more active role. Conflict do not arise instantly out of nothing. You can even, I would say, see them developing and escalating. If you follow an issue, you will see if it can escalate or de-escalate. So prevention has to be the main approach to a conflict, not reaction when it's too late. This means that the uses of mechanism that the Charter has is very important. When we criticize the UN, we forget that we are not complying with the Charter. Not necessarily, it's not the UN that is failing. We are failing in not committing ourselves with the UN. You have mechanism, you have this unique instrument by the Secretary General. By the way, UTAN, the third Secretary General, Tant, because U means Mr. It's like a title. His name is Tant. Used this mechanism very wisely during the missile crisis with Cuba. He was able to mediate between two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States. He even traveled in October 62 to La Habana. He met with Fidel Castro and was able to put the authority and I would say the umbrella of legitimacy and legality to the agreement that was being negotiated directly between President Kennedy and Khrushchev. So the role is there, the mechanism is there, the institution is there. Let's give a little bit more room of maneuver to our next Secretary General. And by the way, Tant was very active because he had a group of non-aligned countries and certain Nordic countries from Europe that accompany him. So you need to build the volume, a robust approach to peace. We always say that if you want peace, prepare to war. I would say if you want peace, prepare yourself for peace. And for that, you need to build alliances, use institutions, and have credibility because the UN, still up to the day, is the only institution that can give you legitimacy. And by the way, a parenthesis, in these 14 points in the MOU agreed between the United States and Iran, the last point refers to that the whole agreement, when it will be negotiated, if and when, will go to the Security Council and will be adopted by a resolution of Security Council, as it happened with the agreement in 2015. So we criticize the UN, but it's like a lender of last resort, like the Monetary Fund, but for politics. Another idea, I think it's very important. We are always constantly talking about the Security Council, the UN, failure, expansion. I'm not in favor of adding more permanent members to the Security Council because somehow more members, permanent members with a veto power means adding more blocking capacity. Each and every country has its own and particular major interest. Having the power veto could become an invitation for this new member to use it more often. So we will not only have 5 members with the capacity of veto, which is blocking, because unfortunately the evolution of the veto has moved away from the original idea of giving a major responsibility to a blocking status. We need to deblock. For instance, in August 2015, France, with the support of Mexico, launched the political declaration of suspension of veto power in cases of mass atrocity. This initiative has the support of 118 countries. It means that if there's a major conflict, there should be a voluntary restraint of a veto power member if it is involved in the conflict. We should also use more, and I'm going again to refer to articles of the Charter. Chapter 6, which has to do with settlements of dispute. We should again look for prevention. You very rarely see a meeting of Security Council under the Article 33, 34, or 35, which means that you should go first for equity, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement. You might investigate any dispute, and even any member of the Security Council or a non-state member can call the attention of Security Council. So again, we have a lot of mechanism for prevention. We usually have a meeting of Security Council after the crisis erupted, not before. We need also a more active and robust General Assembly. Article 11 states that the General Assembly can consider issues governing disarmament and regulation of armaments. The General Assembly, always under Article 11, may discuss any question relating to the maintenance of international peace and security. Article 10 says that the General Assembly may discuss any question or any matters within the scope of the present charter. So again, we have a body, a universal body that can play a role. It's not obligatory. It's not as the Security Council acting as under Chapter 7, but we have the possibility of prevention by calling the attention, inviting the countries to de-escalate, to mediate inquiries. So we have a lot of instruments to prevent, and unless we use them while the crisis has started, it's impossible to go back. We have the resolution Uniting for Peace, adopted in 1950, which says that when the Security Council is blocked, you can go to the General Assembly. You have the Liechtenstein resolution adopted in 2022 that goes in the same direction. When the Security Council is blocked or there's a veto and the resolution is not adopted, you can go to the General Assembly. What we should avoid is going to the General Assembly to replicate the debate of the Security Council. We can try to empower by custom a little bit more the General Assembly. Remember that one of the most important mechanisms of the UN, the peacekeeping operations, are not in the charter, and it's like, I would say, a constitutional mutation. They were introduced, so you don't need necessarily to reform the charter, which implies the agreement of the 5 permanent members. We could work by custom, by evolution. And one important evolution took place in the 90s. It's the Arria formula. Diego Arria was the permanent representative of Venezuela in the 90s at the UN. And in March 92, he was contacted by a Croatian priest who wanted to convene to be a witness of the atrocities in the violence in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The council was not able or not willing to meet on this matter. So Arria invented what is called the area formula, which means that the Security Council now listens to individual members outside the room of the Security Council to show that it is not a formal meeting, but it's still a meeting of the Security Council under the formula area. And in that meeting, you have NGOs, individual, high representative. You have we the people being more active and participating. Why not to adapt the area formula to the General Assembly? The General Assembly meets constantly. It can always meet either in its formal agenda during the year, during the General Assembly, or through the mechanism of prevention, Articles 10 and 11. Why not to try to use and adapt the area formula to the working methods of the General Assembly, and you could have the General Assembly meeting in another room, in the trusteeship room or in another one, and listening to direct actors. That will empower with the people. It will show more interest, and maybe could help to have more trust and confidence in the institution, which is seen as being very far away of conflict. A last point I would like to stress is that we are in a digital era. In a digital era. Something very new. It's not this the place to discuss artificial intelligence, but if we consider, and I consider that we are in a post-Westphalian world, which means that the states has no more the total monopoly of international relations. We have been abandoned by Max Weber in certain cases. What if artificial intelligence becomes an autonomous actor? We are already seeing artificial intelligence with a lot of participation in military conflicts, in everyday life. So I think that we have to start paying more attention to the possibility of artificial intelligence being an autonomous actor. When we adopted at the UN the Pact of the Future, we adopted also the Digital Compact, and the Secretary General has created 2 panels. The last one with 40 experts. They have been meeting in Geneva, and the idea is to work on artificial intelligence governance. Twofold. Can we govern, regulate artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence in governance? What will be the role if it becomes an autonomous act? And let me end with a plaidoyer. I'm definitely a multilateralist by nature and profession. So multilateralism is not just about institutions. It's also about culture. What we really need is a different, a renewed multilateral culture. The institution is there. We have to adapt it. We have to renew it. We need to make an aggiornamiento of the institution, that for sure. It already started with the UN 80. The bureaucracy, the secretariat is doing its work. We have candidates, and I think that Professor Wouters will refer to that, have all of them a commitment to renew the institution, but that will not be enough unless we have a clear commitment by member states. Great power politics, although it's very tasty, doesn't solve problems. We are witnessing major wars. they never end. And if we go to see when we had stable and lasting solutions, almost always there was the UN behind that. So first of all, we need more commitments by member states and more commitments by major member states. And secondly, we need a new multilateral culture that will not be top down. We need to make it bottom up. That's why I think that this webinar between two institutions, two universities, could be or could help. I don't think that we are going to invent anything, but would help to start a new multilateral culture with our students, with the viewers, bottom up. We need more connectivity, and we need, and I will end up with this, based on my experience, we need to put more pressure on governments, on ministries of foreign affairs, because they still work under the logic of Westphalia. And multilateralism in the 21st century means that you need to have a very, very delicate and subtle balance between national interest and common goods, because legitimacy, universality, and legality can only be given by the UN. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricardo, for your words. To all of you, if you have questions and comments on Ambassador Lagorio's intervention, please do use the chat tool. And we will now listen to Professor Jan Wouters' remarks.
Good morning, good afternoon. I hope you hear and see me. I'm communicating you from a very hot Belgium, where we are really having a first heat wave this year. So let's talk about the Secretary General and his succession. The current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, will complete his second 5-year term at the end of this calendar year. So on the 1st of January 2027, a new Secretary General has to take office, assume leadership of an organization which is at the same time indispensable and under unprecedented pressure. The next Secretary General will inherit an international system characterized by geopolitical fragmentation, growing skepticism about multilateralism, multiple armed conflicts, a climate emergency, increasing financial constraints, and rising demands for institutional reform. So the person to be selected this year in 2026 will not merely manage the United Nations Secretariat. She or he will be expected to preserve the relevance and the effectiveness of the United Nations. At a moment when the foundations of the post-1945 international order are being questioned more fundamentally than at any time since the end of the Cold War. I would like to address 4 big questions. First, who are the candidates? Let's look at their profiles, right? What are their prospects? Second, how does the appointment process work? And what can we expect in terms of timing, in terms of political dynamics? Third, what challenges will the new Secretary General face? And fourth, what role can we expect the Secretary General to play in the ongoing reform process of the United Nations, including the continuation of reforms initiated by Antonio Guterres? So that's my agenda. Let me start with the appointment process itself. The UN Charter is very simple. It's very brief about that. It devotes 1 single sentence to the appointment of the Secretary General. Article 97 provides that the Secretary General shall be appointed by the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. And although this provision sounds very straightforward, it conceals a highly political process. Formally speaking, the Security Council recommends a candidate and the General Assembly appoints the candidate. But in practical terms, a decisive stage occurs within the Security Council and particularly among its 5 permanent members. The crucial reality is that no candidate can become Secretary General if one of the permanent members of the Security Council decides to veto the appointment. So the Secretary General is selected not only because of her or his qualifications, but also because she or he is acceptable to all 5 permanent members. Historically, you can tell very long stories here, but historically, many successful candidates have not necessarily been the first choice of every major power. But they were candidates whom none of the major powers considered unacceptable. Now, since reforms were introduced in 2016 during the selection process that led to the appointment of Antonio Gutierrez, the appointment procedure has become more transparent. Candidates now submit formal vision statements. I've read them all. It was interesting to compare. They participate in public hearings before the General Assembly. They answer questions. They both from member states and civil society. And you could say all of this has enhanced the legitimacy of the process, provides for greater public scrutiny of candidates. But let's face it, the decisive stage remains largely confidential. During the second half of 2026, the Security Council will conduct a series of informal straw polls, as it is called. In these straw polls, members indicate whether they encourage, discourage, or express no opinion regarding individual candidates. And as the process advances, special ballots will reveal whether negative votes originate from permanent members. So eventually a candidate will emerge who appears capable of obtaining the support or at least the acquiescence of all 5 permanent members. Okay. Most observers expect that decisive phase of the selection process to occur between more or less the end of July and October, with a formal appointment by the General Assembly likely during the autumn. At least that's what we hope for. Now we are mid-2026 and 6 candidates dominate the field. So let me come to the candidates because they differ considerably in terms of professional background, political experience, and perceived political support. There was a 7th candidate, the Argentinian Virginia Gamba, but she withdrew. Let me start, and without any particular alphabetical order or order of preference, I start with a candidate who was actually nominated very early in the process. And the 25th of November, there was the opening of the possibility for candidacies. And the next day, the 26th of November, Argentina nominated Mr. Rafael Grossi of Argentina. If you don't mind, I'm going to indicate the age of the candidates as well, because it's sometimes interesting to know a little bit about that. So he is 65. He has spent most of his career in diplomacy and international nuclear governance. That's important to highlight. He has served in the Argentinian Foreign Service, became one of the leading figures within the International Atomic Energy Agency, where he served as Argentina's ambassador to Austria and to the international organizations in Vienna, became chief of staff of the IAEA, and in 2019 was elected Director General. His tenure at the IAEA has coincided with some of the most serious nuclear crises in recent decades. He has played a central role in negotiations concerning Iran's nuclear program, North Korea's nuclear ambitions, the safety of Ukrainian nuclear facilities during the ongoing war. Few international officials have interacted as frequently with Washington, Moscow, Beijing, London, and Paris over the past several years. So you could say Grossi's principal strength lies in his ability to work with all major powers. At a time when geopolitical rivalry increasingly paralyzes international institutions, many governments view his diplomatic pragmatism as an important asset. Unlike some candidates, he is not strongly associated with a particular ideological agenda. His reputation is that of a professional international civil servant capable of navigating highly sensitive political environments. The principal question, in fact, surrounding Grossi is whether his expertise in nuclear governance translates into broader leadership of the entire United Nations system. Critics sometimes note that his experience is concentrated in security and non-proliferation issues, rather than development, humanitarian affairs, or social policy. But as said, his demonstrated capacity to engage simultaneously with Western governments, China and Russia, make him particularly attractive in the current geopolitical climate. So, for that reason, some diplomats regard him as one of the candidates least likely to face a veto from a permanent member. Going to the second, Rebecca Greenspan. Rebecca Greenspan, if Grossi is often regarded as the strongest diplomatic candidate, Rebecca Greenspan of Costa Rica is frequently viewed as the strongest multilateral candidate. What do I mean by that? She is an economist by training. Greenspan, who is 70 at the moment, served as vice president of Costa Rica from 1994 to 1998. Then she embarked upon a quite impressive international career. She occupied senior positions within the UN Development Program, led the Ibero-American General Secretariat, and since 2021 has served as Secretary General of UNCTAD. Her career has been devoted largely to questions of development, international finance, poverty reduction, economic governance, and international cooperation. So she combines political experience at the national level with extensive leadership experience inside the UN system itself. And that's why quite a few diplomats consider her particularly well qualified, because she brings together four important attributes: governmental experience, multilateral experience, managerial experience, and development expertise. She's also regarded as an effective communicator, capable of building bridges between developed and developing countries. Also politically, she appears well positioned. She enjoys broad support throughout Latin America, Europe, and much of the global south. She has not become closely associated with controversial geopolitical positions, and there are currently, at least to my knowledge, no obvious indications that any permanent member of the Security Council would oppose her candidacy. An additional factor is, of course, gender. Since the creation of the UN in 1945, every Secretary General has been a man. And many governments, civil society organizations, and former senior UN officials have argued that the time has come to appoint the first female Secretary General. I remember last year, in March 2025, when our university, KU Leuven, celebrated its 600th anniversary, we gave a honorary doctorate to the United Nations, which was handed over to the Secretary General, Antonio Gutierrez. And responding to a question from the audience about whether he supported the idea of a female Secretary General, he was clearly very, very supportive. So Greenspan is widely seen as one of the strongest candidates who could achieve such a historical breakthrough. Now let me come to the second female candidate, Michelle Bachelet of Chile. Arguably, she possesses the most impressive political resume among all candidates. At age 74, she is also the oldest candidate. She was nominated by Chile, Brazil, and Mexico, but Chile withdrew its nomination on the 25th of March. She's a physician by profession, and she served twice as president of Chile. And before becoming president, she served also as Minister of Health and later as Minister of Defense. Following her presidency, she became the inaugural Executive Director of UN Women and subsequently served as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. So let's face it, few candidates can claim experience as both a head of state, cabinet minister, leader of major UN agencies, and head notably of one of the most politically significant human rights organs of the UN. So Bachelet's candidacy, which she very actively proclaims in her vision document, it's essentially built around the argument that the Secretary General must possess both political authority and moral credibility. She emphasizes the defense of international law, the protection of human rights, and the revitalization of multilateral diplomacy. Now, her challenge lies precisely in the prominence of her human rights record. While many governments admire her commitment to human rights, and she too has received a honorary doctorate from KU Leuven at the time, some states are less enthusiastic. China and Russia may view her candidacy with greater caution than candidates who are perceived as more politically neutral. Some actors in the United States have also criticized aspects of her tenure as High Commissioner. So as a result, you could say that Bachelet presents an interesting paradox. She may be the most internationally recognized and politically experienced candidate, yet she may also face greater difficulties in obtaining unanimous acquiescence among the permanent members of the Security Council. Now I come to the second male candidate, and he's not from Latin America. Macky Sall of Senegal, currently 64, is the only African candidate in the race. He was nominated by Burundi on the 2nd of March. Macky Sall served as president of Senegal for a long time, 2012 till 2024. And before becoming president, he held a number of senior governmental positions: prime minister, president of the National Assembly, minister of Mines and Energy. And in his candidacy, he emphasizes practical governance experience, economic development, and the concerns of the Global South. And he argues that the international system must better reflect contemporary realities and that African voices remain underrepresented within global governance structures. Now, at the same time, his candidacy faces significant obstacles. First, there is currently a widespread expectation that the post should rotate to Latin America, a region that has not held a position since Javier Pérez de Cuéllar left in 1991. And Sall's later years in office gave also rise to a number of political controversies that may affect certain perceptions of his candidacy. So he's a serious contender, but many analysts place him behind Grossi and Greenspan. Now let me come to Maria Fernanda Espinosa. On May 9th, little more than a month ago, a fifth candidate threw her hat in the ring, Maria Fernanda Espinosa of Ecuador. She's 61. She was nominated by Antigua and Barbuda, and she's the first, well, in that sense, the first Caribbean member state that nominated a candidate in this year's process. She joins two other candidates, Michelle Bachelet and Macky Sall, in being nominated by states of which they are not citizens, and that's an interesting phenomenon. What has she done? She served as Foreign Minister of Ecuador, Defense Minister, and as permanent representative to the United Nations. Most significantly, she served as President of the UN General Assembly during its 73rd session. Her candidacy is very interesting because she combines deep knowledge of UN institutions with a strong reform agenda. She has extensive experience in diplomacy, environmental policy, sustainable development, and multilateral negotiations. In her vision, the UN must become more representative, more transparent, more responsive to contemporary challenges. It's very interesting that she mentions a number of challenges that the other candidates don't really focus on. Like Greenspan and Bachelet, she would, of course, also become the first female Secretary General. I think that her principal challenge is more geopolitical than professional, meaning that she is widely respected within UN circles, but she has not yet demonstrated the same level of support among major powers as some of her competitors. And so the decisive question, as always, as I said already, is whether she will be able to persuade permanent members of the Security Council that she possesses the right political stature. And then a sixth significant entrant is Caroline Rodriguez Birquet of Guyana, who currently serves as Guyana's permanent representative to the UN and has been formally nominated by Guyana on 15th of June, just a week ago. And you know, there may be still other candidates being nominated because there is no formal real deadline for the nomination process. We can go more deeply into that. But so she is currently the youngest candidate, 52. She served many years as Guyana's Minister of Foreign Affairs, has played a prominent role in multilateral diplomacy, regional integration, and international negotiations. And as permanent representative in New York, she has, of course, developed extensive knowledge of UN procedures and built relationships across regional groups and major diplomatic actors. So her principal strength is deep familiarity with the UN system, a reputation as consensus builder, the ability to represent the perspectives of both small states and the broader global south, and the fact that she is widely perceived as being a pragmatic diplomat with substantial negotiating experience. Politically, her candidacy may also benefit from Guyana's growing international profile and from continued interest in appointing both a woman and a candidate from Latin America and the Caribbean region. But compared with Grossi, Greenspan, and Bachelet, she currently has a lower global profile and less experience leading large international organizations. So the key question here is, can she transform her strong diplomatic credentials into broad support among the permanent members of the Security Council? Now, time is going fast, so I have to speed up a little bit, and the moderator should definitely give me a sign when I'm supposed to terminate. But who is most likely to win? That's, of course, extremely difficult to predict. Essentially, as I said, because the decisive negotiations occur behind closed doors. At present, two candidates appear particularly strong, as I said, Rafael Grossi and Rebecca Greenspan, for the reason that I've mentioned. Bachelet remains a highly distinguished candidate, but there are concerns about possible objections from one or more permanent members. Macky Sall, Caroline Rodriguez Birquet, Maria Fernanda Espinosa are certainly credible contenders, currently appear somewhat less well positioned, but all of these things may change. Again, we are going to enter very interesting weeks in the Security Council. But as I already made clear, the decisive criterion is not going to be your professional qualifications, experience, and expertise. It is whether a candidate can survive Security Council processes without encountering a veto. Now, if I may, Madam Moderator, I'd like to say still a few words about the challenges facing the next Secretary General. Can I do that? Okay. Well, we have already mentioned it, and also Ricardo has already mentioned many of the challenges. I currently see 5 main challenges to which we have to add in any event a 6th challenge, namely reform of the UN. The first challenge for me is geopolitical fragmentation. Relations among the major powers, as we all know, are increasingly again characterized by strategic competition rather than cooperation. The war in Ukraine continues to divide Russia and Western states. Rivalry between the US and China affects almost every aspect of international politics. The Middle East remains unstable. New conflicts continue to emerge. As we all know, the Secretary General cannot resolve those conflicts alone. But, as highlighted also by Ricardo, and I think these were very, very important points, the Secretary General retains important powers of mediation, agenda setting, preventive diplomacy. So we will need a Secretary General with, I would say, exceptional diplomatic skills, ideally. The second challenge concerns sustainable development. We all know that progress towards Agenda 2030, the SDGs, remains and has even become more than ever significantly behind schedule. Many developing countries, it's a ticking time bomb. They face debt crisis, limited fiscal space, declining development assistance, and restoring at least some momentum behind the 2030 agenda must remain a central priority. Third challenge, of course, the climate emergency. The UN remains the principal institutional framework for global climate governance. And so the next Secretary General will have to maintain pressure to go for, say, ambitious climate action while ensuring that climate policy remains also connected to development and social justice. The fourth challenge, technological transformation. AI, cybersecurity, digital governance, emerging technologies are very quickly totally reshaping international relations. And the next Secretary General will have to ensure that the UN remains relevant in debates concerning global digital governance. Finally, the financial challenge or budgetary challenge. We all know the UN faces persistent budgetary pressures, chronic arrears, growing demands for efficiency. So the next Secretary General will really need to manage expectations and at the same time try to maintain or even improve the effectiveness of the organization. Now, the sixth challenge, as I said, is reform of the UN. Antonio Guterres has pursued, and much to his credit, one of the most ambitious reform agendas since the tenure of Kofi Annan, I would say. His reforms have focused on three principal areas: development reform, which sought to improve coordination among UN agencies operating in the field; management reform, aimed to decentralize decision-making, simplify administrative procedures, and improve accountability; and third, peace and security reform, which sought to improve coordination among the various UN entities responsible for conflict prevention, mediation, and peace building. Interesting processes, interesting results, but they remain incomplete. The next Secretary General will inherit a reform process rather than a finished product. And at the same time, much broader demands for institutional reform continue to grow. And as we all know, but it's subject for a different seminar, the most prominent issue remains Security Council reforms. I won't go more deeply into that. It's something we can come back at during the Q&A, but let's face it, the Secretary General by himself or herself cannot impose Security Council reform. Only member states can do, and nevertheless, the Secretary General can also help to facilitate a dialogue, encourage compromise, and help maintain political momentum. But yeah, beyond all these great chantiers, the next Secretary General will also have to modernize the Secretariat, deepen digital transformation, improve transparency, strengthen accountability, and ensure the long-term financial sustainability of the organization. I don't think that Trygve Lie, when he welcomed Dag Hammarskjöld at the New York airport to the most impossible job on this earth, as he said, he was not far from the truth, especially today. So let me conclude. The appointment of the next Secretary General is taking place at a pivotal moment in the history of the United Nations. The successful candidate will definitely not simply become the chief administrative officer of an international organization. She or he will become the principal public representative of multilateralism itself. And whoever of the six candidates or even other candidates that may still emerge will become the next Secretary General, the central challenge will always remain the same: preserving the relevance and the effectiveness of the United Nations in an increasingly fragmented world. So the person selected this year will need diplomatic skill, political courage, managerial competence, and strategic vision. And above all, she or he will need the ability to convince governments and citizens alike that international cooperation remains both possible and, as Ricardo said, necessary, because the problems know no borders. So the outcome of the 2026 selection process will matter not only for the future of the United Nations, but also for the future of multilateral governance, and I would say for the whole world community at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Wouters, for your remarks. We have a couple of very interesting questions, and as a reflection of our diverse audience, the question goes in different directions in different topics, so I will make sure to make some to make some rounds of questions for you. So the first two questions, I think, there's one in the chat that says the following: we're living through a moment of transition in which it's not just Western values like liberalism being questioned, but the structural principles of international law itself. And this erosion isn't coming only from revisionist, so-called revisionist powers, but also from the very hegemon that built this historically guaranteed order. So how do you think this multi-directional contestation of the liberal international order will shape the challenges the next UN Secretary General will have to navigate? That's one very interesting, very broad question. And I'll couple it with the second one that we have also on the chat. And it puts the focus on the Security Council. So what realistic, in this context, right? What realistic role do you think the Secretary General can play in conflict prevention or resolution, given the current paralysis in the Security Council? So I'll start with these two questions. Ricardo, and then Jan, for both of you.
Well, I would
Ricardo, go ahead.
start with the second one and then move to the first one. Which role for the Secretary General in the Security Council? It's very easy to say what I'm going to say because I'm not presenting myself to run for the Secretary General, but we might need a type of Boutros-Ghali profile. Boutros-Ghali was not re-elected because he was very active in his first term. So if you want to be re-elected, you have to play a little bit more on the side of great power, not to be vetoed. But I think that the current moment might require a Secretary General, he or she, as Jan said, with a lot of courage, skills, and diplomatic vision to mobilize the international community, even at the expense of not being re-elected. Because, and this has to do with the first question, those who are challenging the order, not the liberal international order, because from 1945 to 1989, we had two orders living together. It was not just the liberal order. We had two groups of states. If those countries that are more challenging the foundations of multilateralism, I will put it that way, are major powers. It's not Belgium who is challenging it. It's not Latin America. It's not even France or UK, which last veto of both countries was in 1989. We are seeing major challenge coming from Russia and the United States. We have to be very, very blunt in that, recognize that the countries that were maybe the two most important contributors to the UN in 1945 are the ones that are challenging them. Russia invading Ukraine and the United States questioning the scaffolding of the UN, withdrawing from certain agencies. So what we have to do something very simple. Veto powers are important, but we all play in a lesser role, but the power of the middle powers, as was rightly said by Prime Minister of Canada, is important. And as Bertrand Badi always says, he refers to the l'impuissance de la puissance. Not necessarily being strong means that you can lead. On the contrary, leadership today is much more a matter of soft power than of hard power. So I would go again for a plaidoyer of multilateral countries and for a strong communion between countries that want multilateralism, and that is happening in the Security Council with what is called the 10. The 10 non-permanents are being very active, and with the support of two permanents, UK and France, that are not vetoing, you can have a robust set of allies working for multilateralism.
Thank you, Ricardo. Jan?
Thank you. These are very broad questions. And let me try to reflect on them in a unified way. We talk about the new Secretary General, and the good thing is we have experience from the past, so we know examples of what was good and what was less good. And I would say the thing you absolutely want to avoid is what I would call the Trifeli gap. And that he was the first Secretary General, as you know, from Norway. But he had the bad luck that he fell out of grace, both with Moscow and Washington. So at a certain moment, he was not able to function anymore, and he resigned. It's actually the only Secretary General who resigned from his office. So you want to avoid that. The Secretary General must keep the lines open with, I would say, the whole membership, but in particular with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, however difficult this may be. In that sense, Wouters Ghali is also a bit of a special example because, as you know, he got essentially support from the whole UN membership with one exception, the United States. But yeah, that was also the reason why he could not be renewed. And if you think about it, very visionary and effective secretary generals, very charismatic secretary generals like Dag Hammarskjöld and Kofi Annan, they were both given second mandates. So they were indeed renewed. And so I'm in favor of a Secretary General who can indeed become much more active in conflict prevention and mediation. That's what also is stated in the vision statement of Rebecca Greenspan, because she said the UN has to come back to the table in conflicts. Only, I think last weekend in the Financial Times, there was reference to studies that show that there is really a decline in the instances where the UN plays a major role in conflicts today. It's really, getting less and less. And that's, I think, very worrying. So I think it's right that the Secretary General will have to be more proactive in conflict prevention. That doesn't always mean he has to go through the Security Council, but there is, of course, Article 99. I make a little footnote here, as professors sometimes like to make. Gutierrez has used it, and there was immediately a backlash, of course, because it was seen as not done that the Secretary General would do it. But maybe when Secretary Generals start doing it much more frequently, there will be less of a backlash. But of course, you need to come up with good initiatives, and sometimes, let's face it, it's not bad for a Secretary General to operate discreetly in the shadow. And there again, speaking of Latin America, we have the example of Pérez de Cuéllar, who was indeed somebody who could work very, very efficiently behind the scenes and has actually done major things in terms of a couple of mediatory efforts. So yes, more active, proactive mediation, prevention of conflicts, but sometimes also being able to operate discreetly rather than in the limelight. I'm going to stop here. We could, of course, expand, but looking forward to other questions as well.
Great. So we have a couple of questions regarding something that you both touch upon, which is technology and especially artificial intelligence. And so here's a question about what do you think what role should the multilateral system, and in particular the United Nations, might play in addressing technological challenges? Do you believe the UN currently possesses the legitimacy, institutional capacity, and agility required to contribute effectively to the global governance of artificial intelligence and other transformative technologies? Then we have another question that is perhaps more for Ricardo, because it has to do with the nomination of Rafael Grossi, and if you think that the conflict, the Malvinas conflict between Argentina and United Kingdom might pose an obstacle to Grossi's candidacy in terms of a possible veto from the UK. And then we have a third question that is perhaps broader, but I think it's interesting for us to reflect on this. It has to do with multilateralism more in general, like going away from the UN. We just had, since the beginning of the year, the EU has signed this trade agreement, this agreement with Mercosur, also with India, and we are seeing, amidst increasing fragmentation, we also are seeing some interesting multilateral developments, right? And so what do you think of these trend, of this debate between multilateralism and minilateralism? Do you think this is the direction we are going? So 3 questions, one more on the technological AI global governance, the second one more on the Grossi UK, and the third one that has more to do with multilateralism in general in times of global fragmentation. Ricardo?
Well, I will start with Rafael Grossi. I don't see any obstacle for Rafael Grossi to be elected, being an Argentinian. He has stated that. I think that he has all the capacities to be elected, and I'm not aware that the Malvina issue could or should trigger the veto by the UK. Regarding artificial intelligence, when I was for second time at the UN, not the first time because it was nothing like artificial intelligence 40 years ago, but when I was in last time, it was very interesting because all of the big tech companies has offices in New York dealing with the UN. And I was very impressed by that. So I went to talk to them. Since 5 years, I always refer, when I speak and write, to the tension between the Leviathan and the algorithm. And many of them told me, you see, Ambassador, we algorithm are always taking care of the Leviathan. The Leviathan doesn't necessarily take care of the algorithm. So yes, there's a tension there. Yes, the big tech companies are there, and the UN, and it already started, as I told you, the Pact of the Future has a digital compact, and Secretary General Antonio Guterres has appointed a panel. I think that we need more dialogue in the, I would say, in the framework of ARIA formula at the General Assembly, to talk about this post-Westphalian world where artificial intelligence, big tech companies has a lot to say. In the last G7 meeting in Evian, many companies were present. I think that GAFAM is maybe as important as a G7 or a G20, so we need much more dialogue. And finally, multilateralism. Personally, I don't think that there's an alternative to multilateralism to try to deal with global matters through global solutions. There's no solution for unilateralism, and there's no way to have a solution just through hard power. Year after year, we are increasing military expenditures while decreasing the budget of the UN. The budget of the UN is, I think, 0.5% of military expenditures. And with the interesting footnote that we have year after year increasing military expenditures and increasing conflict. So to end this commentary with one of my favorite songs, let's give peace a chance. It's maybe very romantic, very idealistic, but it's cheaper. And we could that way maybe reassign resources to many things that create conflict, because a conflict is not just a matter of two armies or two ideologies. Climate change generates conflicts, hunger generates conflicts, violations of ecology, energy transition. So let's reassign resources to Agenda 2030, and maybe that could help diffuse and de-escalate or avoid conflict into the future.
Thank you, Ricardo. Jan?
Thank you. About technology, indeed, as Ricardo said, we have from September 2024 the Global Digital Compact. And so it's absolutely worth rereading that document, because there are a number of big challenges that have been addressed, of course, in a typical UN non-binding way, but nevertheless, I think important. It's about closing divides, because let's face it, there are incredible divides in various parts of the world with regard to access to internet and so on. Human rights and the whole question of respect for human rights online and with regard to new technologies, data governance, personal data protection, and so on and so forth. So all these things are already sketched in the Global Digital Compact, but you, of course, need to follow up. And then the main thing is indeed, well, engaging the private sector. Let's face it, this is also one of the things that Kofi Annan realized very well, that he was one of the first secretary generals making the Global Compact for engaging the private sector, making bridges to companies and so on, establishing also the office in which John Ruggie could develop the principles on business and human rights and so on. So, I mean, the UN, of course, should be much more than intergovernmental. It, as Ricardo said, it should reach out to people, to civil society, but also to the private sector. And we still don't have the right kind of governance platforms for that, because this can also be tricky. Let's never forget that organizations can also become hijacked by corporate interests. So you need ways for finding a dialogue and a form of cooperation, engaging those companies, making them also, in a way, commit to certain basic principles, like what happened with the Global Compact. But also then, of course, the UN should inspire a kind of global framework of principles that then would inspire regional and national frameworks. It will probably always remain soft law at the UN level, but as we all know, soft law is an incredibly important process. Think of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It has inspired so many regional human rights initiatives and also national constitutional initiatives. So, I mean, I think that we need still that UN framework to guide us and to prescribe the right global principles, but then with enough space for the regional, like in our case, the European Union, and national systems and legislation that should be compatible with those broad principles. On the question about Mercosur, India, and I would not call that minilateralism. That's bilateralism essentially, and that's happening the whole time. And you may have noticed that, in particular, where I come from, the European Union has been extremely active in the last couple of years in weaving an international network of what they call globally trusted partners: Canada, Singapore, Japan, now Mercosur, India, and so on. And this is all part of a strategy in which the EU, which officially proclaims to be a multilateral player, but knows that sometimes the multilateral level does not work very well, effectively think of the WTO and all its problems. And so, yes, as long as those deep and comprehensive bilateral trade agreements are still compatible with the general principles of the WTO, and in a way built on that, as they call it, WTO plus agreements, then I don't have many problems with that. The main fear I can continue to have, and it is a contested issue among many economists and lawyers, is the question of the spaghetti bowl. That instead of the multilateral system in trade, we are creating an enormous, very intransparent network of sometimes contradictory trade agreements. And that, if you read the lessons of history, does not bode very well. So we need still, I think, an operational World Trade Organization. But again, that's another organization. That's a different debate from today. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wouters. So we have several interesting questions in the chat, but we have to be mindful of everyone's time. But I would just want to acknowledge that we have questions regarding Greenspan's candidacy and her speech at Chatham House a few weeks ago, where she was advocating for Security Council reform. Then we have a question about one thing that is really central, that is the fact that, or if the next Secretary General will be a woman or no this time. We also have a few questions regarding the leadership character, or what are the personal characteristics the next UN SecGen should have, which I think you have addressed in your interventions. And thank you so much for all the questions. We're going to wrap up all the questions and send them to the speakers. But before closing, I would like to ask Ricardo and Jan for final remarks, perhaps your thoughts, or one or two thoughts that you want to share with this audience to close this webinar. Ricardo?
Thank you, Sofia. Well, first of all, the audience for being here with us. Jan, it has been a pleasure to be in the panel with you. And my final remark goes back to the plaidoyer. After 44 years of diplomacy, starting in 1982, 1980, but 1982 at the UN and ending in 2024 at the UN, I see no alternative to global governance and multilateralism. So the discussion should be how to adapt and reform, because the challenges are of global nature. There's no easy or unilateral solution, and there's no solution by oneself. Nobody is an island. Hemingway Dixit. We need to work in common. So my plaidoyer is for a group of multilateral countries working for common solutions to global problems, respecting international law, human rights, and the UN Charter. And for young people to trust multilateralism and to work for a multilateral culture, bottom up and with the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricardo. Jan?
Such a difficult question. But let me say that, well, we are having very high expectations of a next Secretary General, because on the one hand, it must be a pragmatist, somebody with a great expertise and experience. But on the other hand, it should be an idealist. It should be a fixer, somebody who can reform, who can manage, who can, be very skillful diplomatically with all the stakeholders. And by that, I mean much more than the permanent members of the Security Council. It's everybody. It's the whole international community. It's the whole UN system. It's the whole fabric of regional, cross-regional and global organizations. It is civil society. It's the private sector, you name it. And so he should be able to outreach and to liaise with all of these players. But at the same time, I think what really matters is that the Secretary General should also embody the highest ideals and values that are laid down in the United Nations Charter. It's about human rights. It's about the unique value of every human being, regardless of the place on earth where this person is born. It is about sustainable development. It is about really making sure that coming generations will not again succumb to, as the Charter calls it, the incredible problems of war, the scourge of war, as the preamble says, which twice in their lifetime, for the diplomats who negotiated the Charter, had inflicted untold sorrow upon mankind. But this may come back. And we have to be very much aware, the current generation of diplomats, of politicians, of civil servants, but also of teachers like me. We have to really convey a state of urgency to the ones who are responsible and to future generations, that we should take nothing for granted. We see the crumbling of an international order before our own eyes. Like Stefan Zweig, we could say it's too early to detect the new features of the new order, whatever those may be. But one thing we have to be absolutely aware of is that things could go horribly wrong on this planet, both climate-wise, but also in terms of large armed conflicts. And in that sense, I really think we should all reread the Charter, and we should all be very much aware of the fact that the UN remains indispensable. And when we say the UN remains indispensable, it also means we should make it work. And that's what we definitely need an excellent new Secretary General for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan. So thank you so much to both of our speakers for joining us today. Thank you also to our teams at the Center for Global Governance in Leuven and here at Austral, to Victoria, to our moderator, Pamela. Thank you all to the audience for staying and for all your questions. And let's keep in touch. I just shared our channels to stay connected. Until next time, muchas gracias. Thank you and take care.